some evidence recently that if you're listening to a talk, if you're looking at the speaker and watching the slides, there's an energy cost in switching attention, and you don't take things in as well. So I did think of not having any slides, but that seemed quite radical, so I backed out of doing that. Very interesting to hear what's been going on, you know, from the Aspire study. And as Stuart and Helen were talking, I was trying to sort of map it onto what I'm going to talk about, but I'll just present what I'm going to present, and you know, we've got time for discussion later on, really. So I'll just start by saying what's going on in the NHS in Scotland in terms of mindfulness based cognitive therapy and mindfulness based stress reduction. So at the moment, this was based on a survey we did a few months ago. All mainland, there's 8-week mindfulness courses being delivered to patients in all 11 health boards, mainland health boards. 75 active teachers, which is the term we tend to use for people delivering the courses, or therapists, if you like, you could use. 98 courses run per year, 74 of which are for patients and 24 of which are for staff. In total, this is, you know, per year, 1,041 participants, 133 are patients and 308 are staff. Okay. I'll say a little bit, which sort of fits in with some of the stuff about the journey that was being talked about in the talk, just about the history of how things developed in the Scottish NHS. Mindfulness kind of started to come into the NHS around about 2000, 2001, not long after the publication of Donald Siegel et al.'s book on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. I myself have a background in meditation, and we started running courses in Forth Valley, where I was working about 2001, for people referred, patients referred from to psychology from primary care. We were fortunate having a couple of South African psychologists visiting who'd done some mindfulness training with a GP in South Africa who trained with John Kabat-Zinn. So we had that sort of expertise coming in, which enabled it to get started. There's one or two areas in Scotland also, other areas started using mindfulness, but it's very much on a pilot basis, which is, I guess, is how these things kind of tend to start. But as a result of that, perhaps, some of you will recall the Doing Well by People with Depression project in the early 2000s, which was recognising the prevalence of depression, an attempt to find, you know, a range of ways of addressing the needs and offering therapy and support and treatment for people with depression. And as part of that, we got some funding to start off looking at how to make mindfulness available on a more systematic basis. And that was the start of developing a training pathway for mindfulness teachers. So what we were doing there, in fact, is running 8-week courses for staff, that being the first step on you know, becoming a teacher. I think probably because of that work, we then got, when the Doing Well project finished, our work got picked up by NHS, by the Psychological Therapies Project, and they were really quite, you know, keen on us. Well, basically what had happened is because of the mindfulness that appeared in the SIGN guidelines, MBCT, for as a treatment for recurrent depression. It was because it was in the SIGN guidelines for depression. It got into the matrix. Because it was in the matrix, it was one of the therapies that NHS wanted to support. So it was very much, in that sense, through the evidence base, was a way into it. So NHS supported us really in developing a pathway, and we've now, you know, developed the training pathway. That was several years ago, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And every year they've given us a small amount of money on a year-by-year, non-recurring basis to support the work, and they've been very helpful in that respect. And it's enabled us to develop the whole pathway. And I think importantly, the NES, it being NES, the NES brand, if you like, has given it an authority and a credibility with local managers that it wouldn't have otherwise have had. So that was really important. I think probably at least as important as the funding, really. And this has been that kind of national strategic approach is actually unique to Scotland in a health service. And as far as I'm aware, we're still the only country in the world, in Scotland, that's got that systematic approach to providing mindfulness. And I think, as I say, NES has been a key factor in that. So yeah, just to pick up the point about mindfulness based, I think Lucy mentioned. What our project is geared towards is mindfulness based cognitive therapy and mindfulness based stress reduction, which, if you're not familiar with it, with those terms, or very familiar with them, firstly, mindfulness is the key. Mindfulness is the key element, the core element. So it's based on half-hour mindfulness practices. MBCT is geared particularly towards specific conditions like depression or eating disorders, mainly depression. Whereas MBSR is more generic, but also reflecting, it can be used in the community as a generic intervention, but it also can be used for people particularly with long-term medical conditions, which is how it kind of originated with John Cabot saying. We use both. The emphasis, I think, is probably on MBCT a bit more, but depending on the area, we do adapt it to the needs of the patient group as well, taking into account the evidence base. And in some ways, as a therapy, it's unusual because it requires this personal practice of the teacher, which, and the term used is embodiment. You've got to walk the talk, basically. And so all the teachers who teach mindfulness have a daily or very regular personal practice. And interesting hearing the comment about top down and bottom up in the talk. But it's a lot of it, although it's had this central coordination, a lot, and in fact I'd say most of the energy has come from the grassroots practitioners, really, who've done an 8-week course. They found it helpful on a personal level. They've been able to see the benefit potentially for the client group they're working with, and they've put a lot of energy into it. And increasingly the NES and central role has been a kind of facilitating and supporting role, really. And I think that is a sort of, again, a unique feature of mindfulness. It has this sort of energy about it because people have a personal commitment to it, as well as seeing the evidence. Okay, features of it, features of the system that we're using. The NES coordination is basically me, and at the moment it's a colleague who's not here today, can't make it, Karen Fenner. Before that was V. Freer and Charlotte Proctor, who is here. We were funded to initially actually deliver the pathway, which is, the 8-week courses, a year's personal practice under supervision, and then going through a training process. In developing that, and as people became experienced teachers, we were able to establish a local mindfulness lead in every health board, one or more leads, who then took on the coordinating role. It kind of started devolving really from a central role to health board level, health board area level, and as part of that there was a cascade in in training teachers. The term trainer is referring to people who train teachers to teach mindfulness to clients. So most of the teacher training now is taking place at a health board level, and as is, of course, the course delivery. The course delivery is done locally, and in some areas it's actually been devolved even further to locality level. So, for example, Lanarkshire have a very systematic locality-based model where each local area has its own mindfulness course, and it devolved. The other and to keep the coordination, the other thing that NEST supports is a national network of basically mindfulness leads. So every health board has 2 representatives on the mindfulness network, which meets 3 times a year. We have day meetings 3 times a year, and it's both a way of kind of disseminating things coming out from NEST, but equally importantly, if not more so, it's a way of in trying to get a strategic approach, learning on what's happening on the ground and acting as a reference group, so any new developments take into account what's going to be feasible, and kind of realistic, and fit into what's actually happening on the ground. So it's very much a two-way conversation in that sense, rather than being top-down. It wouldn't work really if it was top-down. It wouldn't fit, where people are at. But that is, I think that's been a key feature of how we have moved forward, and how I think we'll continue to. Okay, so the governance of this is that we have a training pathway, which is really kind of what I mentioned there, that doing the 8-week course as a participant, having a year's personal practice, going through a teacher training process, and then delivering a course, an 8-week course, in conjunction with a more experienced teacher, so like an apprenticeship model, if you like. We now have a network of supervisors. We provide supervision training as a kind of NEST supervision training, as a bolt-on, as you'd like to call it, this generic NEST supervision training, and with a specialist 2-day training in mindfulness supervision. And that's for people, in order to be eligible for that, you have to have run 9 courses, of which at least 5 should be with the client group that you're working with, i.e. not just staff, unless you're working just with staff. Trainers, the level for trainers is similar. The people who train teachers to supervise either 9 courses, just as I said there, and then go through a kind of apprenticeship with a more experienced trainer. We've been asked by NEST so everybody who teaches mindfulness in the NHS should have who runs courses, as opposed to using it as one strand in, say, ACT or DBT, but who runs 8-week courses should have been through that training pathway. What we're now doing, I've been asked by NEST to do, is to kind of more formally recognise that, and what we're producing is a fairly simple kind of listing process. We're in the process of beginning to implement that, whereby somebody is basically certified as having been through that process, and the fact that they've been through that, there's a referee, probably the mindfulness lead, who will attest to that they've been through that process. Okay, so that's in kind of process at the moment. Okay, the next steps. What's enabled us to implement it to the extent we have done is making it accessible for staff, and as cost effective as possible, if you like. So what we did was we developed a sort of pathway that was kind of, if you like, good enough, gave an adequate standard of teaching for training for teachers. But what we're wanting to do now is to kind of enhance that. As time's gone on, there's now a UK network of mindfulness trainers who are developing a consensus as to what good practice consists of, and we're largely in harmony with that. But we're looking to develop it a little bit. Part of what we're thinking about is having over the year a year teacher training process with possibly 10 individual days. This is still in the planning process. At the moment, we recommend that people have, in addition to that, or in addition to the training they already do, they recommend they go on a sort of residential intensive training, which there's some evidence that to do that improves embodiment of when you're teaching mindfulness. So we don't require that at the moment, and I think there's an issue about whatever we do. I think we need some flexibility for, again, from accessibility, people with young children or carers and so on who are working in the NHS. But I think we want to sort of try and make that a stronger feature of the pathway, and as I say, harmonising with the UK trainers network. So that's one of the things we're looking at the moment. The other issue is kind of getting the implementation is across all the health boards, but it is variable. Management support's variable across health boards. Some are very strongly in favour. Some are kind of, nobody's against it, I don't think, but some are kind of lukewarm, and some areas have struggled to get recognition and resource for it. So I think maybe looking at the teacher training and also looking at the funding is going to be a key issue, because in order to fund this, we're going to have to look at resources. At the moment, the majority of resource comes from the health board in the form of staff time, basically, both for training and for delivering the courses. And then we've got this sort of year by year, basically a few thousand from Nest to each year to support it. But I think, if we're going to really enhance the training and move forward, we need to get the funding on a more secure basis. And I think what we're thinking of doing is kind of developing a clear proposal around this enhanced training, perhaps around implementation as well, and then starting a conversation with funders about how this might happen really. There are areas, some patches, although in England there isn't a systematic provision of mindfulness, in some areas it's been very well implemented. There's real kind of Rolls-Royce kind of services in some areas of pockets of the UK in the health service where there's been a very strong resource commitment to mindfulness, and they're kind of exemplars in a way. And I think we can hopefully aspire to that as well. Okay. Yeah. Just to finish off, I just had one or two. Sorry, just bear with me. Just one or two kind of messages about the delivery of mindfulness. I think is worth kind of bearing in mind. Firstly, just to emphasise that it is an evidence-based therapy for people with quite severe problems, 3 or more episodes of depression, and indeed it's now in fact in the matrix for psychosis as well, although it's not been strongly implemented so far in that area. They're complex interventions which require a high level of skill to deliver. I've sometimes heard people say, well, or managers say, well, this is a lifestyle intervention. Could it not be done, in the community rather than within the health service? Well, the answer to that is yes, it can. And all the stuff that Harry was talking about, there's potential for that. But when we're dealing with vulnerable people with complex mental health needs, particularly, we need to have all the health governance in place. One of the requirements we have for teachers is in the NHS is they have to have a professional qualification working with the client group they're going to be working with. And there's all the stuff about assessment and risk management that we all know about in the health service, which there isn't the same level of awareness of in the community. So the two strands are really kind of parallel rather than one being a substitute for the other. And in the health service, mindfulness works best if it's integrated into a core service. Again, I've sometimes heard, people say, well, it's hard to implement mindfulness or keep it going because of the heat targets. But in fact, mindfulness is a solution to the heat targets. It's an evidence-based therapy. In terms of cost effectiveness, the amount of staff input per patient is about less than a third than for individual psychological therapy. Or in other words, that for every one person you can see for psychological therapy, you can see 3 people for mindfulness-based therapy. And it's an intervention, as we've said, which has benefits over at least a year following the intervention. So it can be, and has been, and I would suggest should be, a part of a core kind of integrated matched care service within mental health. I think probably on that note, I'll just kind of leave it at that. Thanks.
We're going to move towards a panel discussion, but has anyone got any specific questions they want to ask Neil at the moment?
Just about you were saying that NHsgg&c is useful for patients with eating disorders. I work in a service with the most severe and enduring eating disorder patients in Glasgow, and our problem is that we've always been told that if somebody has a very low BMI, then they can't really do a lot of psychological work, very overwhelming for them. What would you say to that? Because you mentioned eating disorders specifically.
Well, I mentioned it because there's been studies looking at MBCT specifically for eating disorders. I have to say I'm not right up to date with the literature on that, but I know, I don't know if you'd like to say anything, Charlotte works in a specialist eating disorder unit and delivers mindfulness, so you might be able to address the BMI issue.
We no longer currently run the traditional 8-week course at the Cullen Centre in Edinburgh, but we have a number of people who've been through the treatment pathway for an eating disorder, and they're at the sort of recovered stage, who we often request that they're referred on to the 8-week mindfulness course, which is supposedly for people with depression, but I think a lot of people who've completed their course of therapy will go there. We have made adaptations and tried to make adaptations, and certainly my last 2 experiences of running similar to an 8-week course, which was a few years ago, was largely people with very low BMI, or people with a lot of complexity in their mental health presentation, and they did struggle, and it was a very sensitive adaptation, and I still felt it was worth doing, but it was a challenge to select the people it would be most appropriate for. So I think Julian is also working with me, and we ended up running more of a drop-in mindfulness group. So because mindfulness is mentioned a lot in eating disorder therapies, and I think most of our therapists are aware of it or are using it in the sort of small way. And so we run this drop-in group for a while, so it felt it was easier than getting people in for a full 8 weeks, and then people who found the dose quite toxic. But we're in the process of revising that, because it feels like the core problem of very low self-compassion is something that we want to address alongside the mindfulness. So I think Julian and I are thinking about looking at, again, a group-based model, maybe an 8-week course or something, so we can take people through a journey, but incorporating quite a lot of the Paul Gilbert type of approach for working with low self-compassion, low self-esteem. So again, that's
we just started the compassion focus in our service, and it seems to have
So what I can do is I can, if you want to contact me, I can try and link you into people. So there's Charlotte Proctor, obviously, is a lot of expertise, and also more Glasgow, I don't mind. I've got Brenda here, who I think you've got who's a dietitian background with an interest. So I'm happy for people to contact me, and I obviously don't know what everybody's doing, but if I know of someone who's got expertise or particular interest, I'll try and kind of direct you towards them. I know there's another question coming from Lars.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. I was just, you described the NES supervision of mindfulness-based interventions, but you mentioned that this didn't apply for people using mindfulness as part of ACT, for example. But I just wondered, is NES ever likely to take an interest in supervising training for that type of mindfulness?
I mean, in principle, I think there's no, in the sense that could somebody who's done the mindfulness supervisor training, the NS supervisor training, supervise somebody using mindfulness in ACT? Is that the kind of thing you were thinking of?
I'm thinking of the large number of staff members. I mean, certainly in my field, I'm sure that there'll be lots everywhere who do use mindfulness in a small way, not in a formal sort of 8-week way. And at the moment, there isn't really any sort of recognised training for these people. I just wondered if that's something that's likely to change in the future. So, it's easy if somebody goes for the full training and gets teacher training, and then, they're in an easier position, but not everyone is in a position to do that.
I have to say, it's not something we've got in the pipeline, simply because, that in a sense, the need for mindfulness with people with depression and the level we're at is such a long way to go in some ways. And but I think in principle, that would be a great thing, really. And I'm a little bit surprised. As I understand it, I don't think ACT or DBT include much in the way of mindfulness training for the practitioners. I would have assumed it would be part of the initial training, but I don't think it is it? But I think, in any event, I think there's a lot of potential for cross-fertilisation. And an example of that, having been through the mindfulness, going through the mindfulness teacher training pathway, and then being able to pass on the benefits of that to people using ACT, and that's great. I mean, that's something we certainly support.
I think that is. I know there's I don't know if she's here today. There's someone who's involved in the DBT trial that's just completed in the south of Glasgow, and she had a similar issue around. She'd done the 8-week their mindfulness-based training, but she was flagging up how her own experience, she felt there was a little bit of a lack of kind of development and support, and actually for her she'd found doing the 8-week had really deepened her understanding of it and capacity to deliver it as part of the DBT. And she had noticed, and again this is just one person and I haven't really got any more evidence, and it might just be not reflective of the broader experience, but she was saying that she felt there was a little bit more disengagement with the mindfulness component within the DBT, and we were wondering whether that reflected the early stages of the development of mindfulness-based approaches, where the initial runs of it were being led by people that didn't have a personal practice, and actually they found the outcomes were much poorer from that. And then when they changed and they started having their own personal practice and deepened that element of skill, they found that actually the outcomes were much better. So I think there is an issue around on that. I guess that there's a number of hurdles to go, aren't there? There's trying to get maybe the mindfulness base more established and a stronger framework, and when that starts to become more stronger, maybe there'll be this cross-fertilisation and more capacity to support these other approaches as well, that will hopefully, maybe they'll benefit MBCT as well. So I think that is something that's floating around for people.
I think it's a good point. I think one of the one of the most effective ways of enhancing one's mindfulness in ACT is to do the 8-week course. And in a sense, separate from what we're doing here, there's a strand of mindfulness-based approaches being funded by, in some areas anyway, by Healthy Working Hours, specifically as a staff intervention. Yeah. So there is availability of courses around, hopefully.
I heard you say that mindfulness-based therapy is now in the matrix for psychosis.
Yeah.
Is that MBCT? Is that the 8-week MBCT?
No, I think, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure.
I had a quick look at sorry, I'm jumping in, sorry. I need to stop doing that. It's not my fault, it's your space. But I'm going to talk anyway. I had a look at the references on that, because I was quite surprised to see it. Not that I didn't think it had a role, but I was like, oh, okay, that's quite a jump. And when I looked at the references in the matrix, there were very few that related to psychosis that were the kind of 8 weeks, and they were much more ACT-based. So I would say when you've got a query on the matrix, go and have a look at the references to it. So I think it's a very different course if you were running it to an 8-week mindfulness. But I would also say it'd be really important, anyone who's considering doing that you have had quite a lot of involvement in following the training pathway because of the client group that you're working with there. That I think you have to have quite a good understanding of if you're, the level of intensity, how to modulate that, dealing with adverse reactions to that, and making sure that people are in a place where they can kind of flag that up if they are experiencing it.
And it was Paul Chadwick who developed it initially.
Yeah.
And you know, he used much shorter practices,
Yeah.
about 10 minutes, smaller groups, so it was quite heavily adapted to the needs of that client group.
So I wonder whether we have timetabled in a panel discussion. Now, obviously we've lost Harry, but we were very lucky to get him to come and present. So I wonder if I could have Professor Mercer up and myself.
You could just stand and just double that.
So
And if not, you can all sleep.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, if you do need to escape, if I haven't put my email up, but you would have emailed Janice Jeffrey. Now, she's not my secretary, but she can link you into me if you need to contact me. But I'm on the email network. It's Lucy Gamble is in the game, and then there's the GGC, and I'll do my best to link you into people. But please bear in mind that the mindfulness needs only an aspect of my job. I also work in CMHT, so I can sometimes be a bit slow to get back if the CMHT work's quite heavy, but I will respond.
and a few folk have asked about if the slides are available
Yeah.
from Aspire. I don't know about Harry's slides. I need to ask him permission, but
Consent, yeah.
the Aspire slides are definitely available. We can email to people if we've got people's
What we will
emails,
do is
put them on the app.
we will, if that's possible, we will put them on the app, because that's probably, because emails I know get really full and I know things can get lost, so we'll put them on the app.
Put them on the app.
If you can link into that, you'll be able to access. If we've recorded quite a lot of this as well, so if the recordings come out okay and are good enough to upload and people give consent,
Yeah.
if I need to check all of that, then we'll try and put those up, and you'll get access to measures. Yeah.
So that's Unida's card.
Yeah.
I can also put them on Glasgow University
Yeah.
website, so if you were to Google mindfulness and my name, then it should come up. So